I am here with Dr. Jess Garcia from the Rochester Public School Board, and we are here in our community conversation, Good Neighbor Conversations, to continue our talk around what it means to be a good neighbor here in the Rochester and Olmsted County community. So welcome, Jess.
Thank you.
It is so glad to have you here. I wanted to begin by asking, for you personally, what does it mean to be a good neighbor? What does that look like? What does that mean? How do you understand that phrase?
Yes, thank you. So I actually like to think of the question, like, what makes a good relative? Because to me, I think neighbor sometimes can mean other, right?
Yes.
Like not in our home, someone who lives next door to us, and so kind of disconnected from who we are as a people, where I like to come at interactions with other people as they are my siblings on earth.
Yes.
So to me, you have very different relationships with people in your family, and I think
Absolutely.
that can be true with people who are, as we're kind of identifying them, neighbors. But it just sort of means that there is a responsibility in the community, in the family community, to take care of one another.
Yes. Yeah, I really appreciate that. One of the things we just started our series this Sunday, and we're reflecting on how neighboring can be a very abstract neighbor, can be an other so easily, and something really general. So I appreciate you bringing another layer to that of how you can live into that, and even thinking of your family as neighbor or your neighbors as family can open that up a little bit more for how we can live into it.
Yeah.
In thinking about your work with the school board, how do you think that you've seen people being good neighbors? Have you seen examples of that across, school and education and some of the places where you've encountered that in that line?
Yeah, absolutely. I think on the broader lens, when you look at our community schools, I think that is absolutely being good neighbors, good relatives, right? Because we're recognizing that there are needs within a community, and you don't have to ask for the thing that you need. It's just there for you to take.
Right.
And for people who support our community schools, I think that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
Because I think that was just sort of the way that I grew up, is if I have extra, you can have it if you need it. And if I don't have what you need, but I have the ability to help you find what you need, then that's what we do.
Absolutely.
And so I think that on a broad scale for the school district is just one of many examples. I think another example that I have felt personally, actually, you were a part of the Honesty in Education letter from the clergy. I think that was an excellent example of being a good neighbor. The thing that precipitated that, I think, was, we kind of felt very alone, and, you're using the Lord's Prayer to sort of aggress or express some of your hostility towards another group. And I don't think any of us would have known how to ask for help. And I think that we felt very held in that moment. That other people were recognizing what we were trying to do, and also recognizing that those who were upset about it maybe were misinformed, and how to use your voice in support of the work that we're doing. So very good neighbor, relative example.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Good. I'm really glad to hear that, and that this has been, I think, a particularly challenging time, I'm sure, for your work, and the layers around how challenging that has been in offering leadership. And it's hopeful to hear examples emerging of where you all have felt supported or encouraged in your work, but I know that the challenges are many. Yep. And it's a fairly divisive time, to say the least. In the midst of all this context, tell us about some of the opportunities and also the challenges that there's people and students in particular, families are facing in neighborhoods around Rochester. What are we not talking about?
Yeah. So I think when I was looking into running for school board, I think it was very clear to me who had the resources that they needed and who did not. And I sort of was missing, who all sort of falls in the middle there.
Right.
Because I think when you're at the extremes, those are very obvious examples sometimes. Yes. And the interesting part about being on the school board is that, when I used to drive around Rochester and I could see a house that looked in disrepair or whatever, I didn't understand what maybe was happening specifically in the family, but I could assume, right? Or I drive by a house that looks very nice and I would love to live in someday, but probably will never achieve that. I also don't know what's going on with that family, but could probably assume. And sometimes the information that comes from those families now to us as a school board, when they email us and tell us this is how this policy is going to affect us, or this is how this thing happening in this district is going to impact our family, it isn't always exactly what it seems.
Right.
And I think that there are people who absolutely have maybe financial resources, but they don't have community support resources or vice versa. So it's very humbling, I think, every day to open the vast amount of emails that we get of people explaining very explicitly what is happening to them and their family in our district.
Wow.
And having to sort of hold all of that. You know, I'm a psychologist, and so I do that already. I take care of people's mental health. So
Sure.
to know this is a very prescribed thing that I do, right? I take care of people's mental health, and then after
Absolutely.
my day job ends, now I'm looking at taking care of 100,000 plus individuals. Not all of them may be actively working or going to school in our district, but what we do affects them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It sounds like it's really changed the way that you move through some of these spaces that might have been familiar spaces, but you can't unsee and unknow some of the stories that you've heard now of what people are doing. Do you think that helps to break down some of the assumptions that you might have had otherwise, or just maybe better inform? And
I think certainly better informed, because, you know, when I was growing up, I was sort of on the have-not end of the spectrum. And so it was always like, wow, they have so much and they don't ever have to want for anything, but recognizing that sometimes that is not always true. So
Right.
I think it did tip me in that respect, but also I think it gives a broader context for what are all the other things that people are concerned about, because sometimes people will email me about things that I have not ever thought of. And I'm always appreciative of that, because I think that is where good change is made, right? So even if the decision we're going to make helps the majority, there are still a group of people that are going to be potentially negatively impacted, or at least not helped by what we're doing.
Absolutely.
And then how do we counter that?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's probably the heaviest part of the work, but also
Sure.
I feel like it's the most meaningful to me also.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to be able to think that regardless of what the ultimate decision is, to be informed and thoughtful in your process, and look for ways to, if someone is negatively impacted by something, to mediate that and to care for people, and to know that they've been heard and that their voices are recognized and being considered as part of the input. You made reference earlier to some of the honesty and education conversation that's happened. What are some of the other challenges that you see facing sort of the broader education system in Rochester, but also just in the time that we are living in?
Yeah, the statewide, nationwide, I think just what funding in education looks like is a huge issue.
Yeah.
I did not understand before I joined the board exactly what funding streams make up, you
Right.
know, a school budget.
Right.
And so we ride around $250 million budget, and that doesn't just come from one or two places. It comes from what feels like infinite amount of funding streams.
Absolutely.
And so it's very confusing, I think, for the community to understand why sometimes we may ask for different things, right? Like if we're running a referendum, for example.
Right.
And why sometimes we may get a gigantic pot of money that can only be used for X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And why can't we just shift that into another funding stream? Or why can't we just ask, you know, the very wealthy parents of Rochester to fund
Give
this
more.
thing that they want, right?
Right.
So I think that for me was the drinking out of the water hose moment of being on the board.
Sure.
Like wow.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine having to be the money guy.
Right.
John Carlson, he does a fantastic job. I can't imagine being him and working with a board like we have, even though, you know, it's not necessarily contention, but having to consistently report, like, this is where we're falling short, or this is where we're doing well, and these are all of the things that we have to worry about, like teacher contract negotiations and things like that. So
Right.
that is sort of like the big work that I think most people don't know or understand. And so sometimes when they ask us, why can you not make a swift decision about this thing? Oftentimes it has to do with either money or contracts or something else. And so it feels, even though it's true, it feels disingenuous to me sometimes to have to tell somebody, like, I know that may seem like a very simple solution, and prior to being on the board, I would have wanted that to be the simple solution too, but now I realize, like, there is all this other stuff that has to happen before we can make that choice.
Absolutely.
And I hate having to do that to a family, right? When they, it just seems so very simple, and to have to say, well, these are actually all the reasons we can't, because then I fight too with myself about, what about can we actually not do because of law or policy, and what do we just not want to do because we haven't done that ever before?
Absolutely. I appreciate your authenticity with that. It's such an important thing to hear, and I think, it sounds like one of the reasons you were drawn to being on the school board was the chance to reflect and represent and be a conduit for folks who might not feel that they are represented in the school board. And so maybe that is also going both ways, and you were doing that, but also having the chance to reflect out of the school board experience what you're seeing and learning about how that process happens, maybe how we can make changes to that process, whatever it is. I think just your openness about that, I can't help but think that's a good thing and a real asset to our school board.
Thank you. I appreciate that too, because it also, you're right, that is what sort of fits the, what are the challenges of Rochester specifically, and one of the reasons I decided to run was because of the discipline disparities for students of color, and it felt to me like just whatever I bring to the table as, all the training that I've had, that would just be helpful.
Yeah.
And at first that was all I was offering, was I just know a lot of stuff about this stuff. Right. And so here you go, I will give it to you. Not exactly for free, but for the nominal fee that they offer us, the school board members. And so I thought, I just wanted to be of help. Yeah. And even if I didn't win the election, I was still going to offer to consult or maybe have a smaller part-time job in the district, because I wanted to be able to support their mission in the work that they were doing around the school district. And those voices that are often not heard, I think sometimes still don't get heard as loudly, because a lot of times I get offline conversations about we don't feel safe, or we don't want to put on record these comments, so can we just talk to you and you hear them and you take them to the board. Reflect, and again, I'm 1 out of 7. Right. And so for them, it's a couple of people out of 70,000, or however many they're speaking up in opposition to. Yeah, absolutely. And just the idea of thinking about the school board as reflective of not this faceless, vague group of people, but individual children, families, households, administrators, teachers who are all have a stake in this and have a life and have the things that they are bringing to their experience of public education. Yeah. That's a heavy thing to hold, but also I think probably it sounds like one of the ways that you keep in front of you what you are there to do. Yeah. And to be reminded of how to live with that. What do you think are some of the relationships that you can see or have seen in some positive ways with neighborhoods and schools? You talked about community schools. Are there ways that you see schools as being particularly helpful to a neighborhood, or that neighborhoods can support schools? Yeah, I think right now they're trying to do a lot more of that. So I'm actually part of our larger strategic plan. They had a couple of subcommittees that are going to inform this work, and so I was part of the family and community engagement group. And so thinking about different ways that we can tap into different places. I also have learned, I suppose, to use my voice separate from the board and asking for assistance from other groups. So reaching out to people saying, I don't really know a ton about this, and maybe people on our cabinet don't, so would you either mind, setting up a meeting with me to talk through some questions that I have about something coming up on the board agenda, and or would you mind, just kind of allowing your expertise to sit with one of our identified cabinet members in that area. Right. So it felt to me like everything was very siloed. Yeah. Watching before I got onto the board, and I think now there's a lot more overlap in the community. Yeah. And we also have a number of community partners. So we work with Fernbook, for example, to provide in school, school-based mental health. Right. We also partner with Family Service Rochester to offer our educators some EAP, mental health services and things like that. Absolutely. We also have a couple of other initiatives where they'll go into, different areas of the community that maybe don't get as much attention from the school, just to kind of support and provide education and information. And that's often coming from some leaders in our, community coordination efforts. Yeah, absolutely. What are some of the things that you would want our congregation to know about the students, the experiences, the stories? We're moving through this series with sort of a dual purpose. One is to encourage people to get to know
and to love and to care for their neighbors who are in their immediate geographic area, right? To really know those actual people, but also to understand who our neighbors are in the larger Rochester community, and especially people they might not come into contact with because they're in a different neighborhood or in a different section, and to move beyond some of the stereotypes and assumptions we have about parts of town and who people are and where they come from. What would you want folks in our congregation to know about that, and to what would you encourage them to do to practically help be good neighbors to our schools?
I mean, even just those things are very practical, tangible ways that you can support everyone in the school district, because to me, even though I recognize there are people here who don't have a child in our school district, who are not educated by our school district, do not work for our school district, they are still going to be affected by what is happening in our school district. And so I want those people to feel connected to their community, and even if they don't feel directly connected to the school, they feel connected to other places of support within our district.
Absolutely.
You just so happen to be one of those places.
Yeah.
And I think that places of worship are incredibly important for building community, and so for our students, I can recognize all of the ways that they, like students by themselves, are already reaching out to try to sort of do some intercultural work.
Yes.
Across race and religion, different like ethnicity, gender, things like that. And so I also would say let your youth also run that part, because I think that right now what I have, I think, been most proud of in the school district is when students step up and they ask for a thing that they want, and how incredibly organized they can be.
Yes.
And it's clear that even though we are all adults on the school board, our work is for the students.
Yes.
And one of the things that we were trying to do is to get the student voice heard more often inside of the board room, rather than just individual board members hearing from students. And so I think if they felt empowered in other places in their community to do that, that would be helpful. And I really do appreciate, again, when other groups that support different aspects of our community are well informed. They show up, they ask questions, they want to figure out how they can support, because I think we always need somebody who's willing to offer a hand, especially until we get fully funded education. Even past that, I think we're always going to need to lean on different groups within our community, and I think that is incredibly helpful. And even things, again, like just the letter of support meant so much to individual board members and the board the board as a whole, that ripples out into being able to do good work for the rest of the school district.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for the work that you are doing, and for, especially in this time, to be lifting up your voice as an advocate, as an ally, as a person who is caring for Rochester's students and families, and the people who are connected with our schools, our administrators and our teachers, and all the people who are giving of themselves to this really important work of educating students. So thank you for your part in that, and for all that you do. And thank you for joining us for our Good Neighbor series. And we will be back with our next episode soon.